glad you didn't, but wouldn't it have been better for you to be still a physicist?
You're glad I didn't, because I would have made such a bad physicist.
No, in the sense that if you really are in the search for the fabric of reality, then all this wishy-washy thinking that philosophers do doesn't get you anywhere. But physics does. And so you're really missing, I think, the principal tool that would have satisfied you.
Yeah.
Well, before asking your question, you should say your name, in which case you would have heard that question is from Peter Atkins.
Peter Atkins is a chemist.
Yes, I know.
I'm a philosopher.
Yes, you are. Everybody is a philosopher. That is, everybody has views about what is justified belief and what isn't, what is justified action and what isn't, what is the life that matters and what isn't. And so yes, in fact, we all are involved, and we don't exactly get these answers from science. Here, there are two basic kinds of questions, I think, that we would like the answers to. What is? What kind of universe are we living in? Here we are. Here we are, right? Where the hell are we? What the hell are we?
And all those hell questions are physics.
Absolutely. I would say our best answers to what is comes from physics.
But there is nothing else.
But there's also the question of what matters. For example, does knowledge matter? Many people would argue not. My family, for example, my family of birth did not particularly think that knowledge mattered. I think it was another thing that always bothered me. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge. How could this make sense? I would always think. How can this possibly be part of God's commandment to us? Don't eat from the tree of knowledge. I mean, it takes an argument that, in fact, knowledge matters. It takes an argument that, in fact, justice matters. And you're not going to get that from science. But they are questions. We're going to get questions about what is. Science, I would never demean science. Science is, it's amazing that we thought of this. This incredible merging of mathematics, a priori reason, observation, and most of all, experiment. Because what this means, this amalgamation, is that we're giving nature a chance to answer us back when we get it wrong, which we are inclined to do, right? So that our intuitions about space and time and everything, right, needed to be corrected. Oh, so you think that simultaneity is absolute, do you? It seems intuitively obvious, do you? Well, we'll just see about that, right? And so this is a way of getting nature, the constituents of nature and the laws of nature, to answer us back when we're getting it wrong. It's fantastic. But it doesn't help us with these other questions. And in fact, I would say even what I just said, that science is a description of reality, of objective reality, this is a philosophical position. It's scientific realism. There are other possibilities, right? There's scientific constructivism. There's instrumentalism. There are lots and lots of possibilities as to what it is that science is doing. And to argue that is in fact giving us a description of objective reality is to interpret science, and we need philosophical arguments for that. I think they are very good. I am a scientific realist. I think there are quite good arguments for that, but they actually go outside the domain of science. You can be a very, very good scientist and be an instrumentalist, or as Stephen Hawking had said in his latest fantastic book. What science does is it's all in the mind. We are constructing models in the mind and imposing them on external reality. That's a view. One can have that view, but one's got to argue it. One can't just put it forth. And that takes philosophy. That takes philosophical sophistication. So even the triumphalist scientific story, which I buy into, it's our best means of telling us what is, takes some kind of philosophical sophistication, some kind of philosophical argument. I know you don't agree with me. I mean, what a triumph it would be. This would be, you could make my life, because I know when I convince you.
Yeah, it's a pity you feel you have to say that we're going to disagree with you. I'd actually like to, you led me to my question, in fact, which is, what do you say to humanists, or anybody else for that matter, who casts science in competition with philosophy?
Yes.
What do you say to people who, I mean, as was advertised in this talk, in fact, you were set up as, science in competition with philosophy.
Oh,
What do
well,
you say to people who have that
we're
view?
not in competition. We are joined at the hip, right? We are committed to reason, right? Let's not diminish the resources of reason. There's more to reason than simply science. It is a great triumph of reason to have been able to trick nature to answer us back when we're getting it wrong. But there are, in fact, other commitments we have without which life seems incoherent. Some of them we have to give up. Because of science. It's that reconciliation. It's the going after maximum coherence that the philosophical enterprise, I think, is after. There was a 20th century analytic philosopher, Wilfrid Sellars, who has this very good essay called Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man. But even that, you see, we've come a long way since the 1950s when that was published. We wouldn't say man now, we would say human, right? I find it offensive to say that word has to stand for humans. Even now, we've been making progress in this way. But in any way, Wilfrid Sellars, I recommend this article, but it turned out that my friend Daniel Dennett also had been very influenced by this view of philosophy. And I went to it, in those agonizing days when I was trying to decide whether or not to go on. I had already applied to graduate school in physics, gotten into where I wanted to go, and was agonizing over whether I really wanted to go into philosophy instead. And I read Sellars' article. And he talks about, that philosophy is this way of just trying to see how it all hangs together, all of it. And that there's the scientific image of the person in the world. There's also what he calls the manifest image of man in the world, person in the world, human being in the world. And we're trying to reconcile these things for maximum coherence. And sometimes things have to go, because of the scientific image. Some things just can't go, he says. For example, the standards we use, the standards of rationality that we use in order to arrive at the scientific image, right? That we have to bring certain standards that we're not deriving from the scientific image. In fact, we can't even arrive at the scientific image without these standards. So of evidence, of coherence, of consistency, all of these things, they're not derived from science. We can't do science without them. Anyway, this is, I think, very satisfying, that this is the sort of thing we're trying to do, trying to have maximum coherence, including moral coherence. If you're committed to your own life mattering, and who isn't really? I mean, even if you are in suicidal despair, it's because you can't, you don't want to. You want to kill yourself because you don't, you matter so much, and you to yourself, you just can't bear it anymore. But this kind of commitment to one's own mattering seems to be something that is very, very hard to give up. What else are there things that follow from that? Can one be committed just to your own mattering in such a way that if somebody violates you, you feel moral indignation, moral outrage. I'm lying on a beach, soaking up the rays. Some big fat guy wants to get from point A to point B. I'm in the way, steps on my stomach, right? Just keeps going. How would I react? How would any of us react to that? How could you do such a thing? Don't you know what you're causing me? How dare you? You had a reason to make a little detour there. To put forth reasons like that, you're already on normative ground. You're already saying there's a reason for other people to act in certain ways in regard to you. Can we just stop there? Does that make sense? Can I be committed to my own mattering? Wittgenstein argued persuasively there can be no private language. Can there be any private mattering? Is that a coherent idea? I think it's not, and I think, in fact, over the course of the long history of moral philosophy, we've unfolded the implications of that. That's why that normative system has made progress in the way that the others haven't, except by being pulled along by reason, by secular reason, right? That's a long answer to what I would say.
David Flint. I'd like to be devil's advocate for a moment.
Are there no angels in this room?
My horns are currently invisible. On two things. You conceded to Peter that science was a really good way of finding out what is.
Yes.
I suggest to you that's wrong. That actually science is not a very good way of finding out what is, because in the long run, scientists keep changing their mind. Everything we believe gets replaced. What science is a really wonderful way of finding out what isn't. We're really good at proving things are false in science. And that turns out to be enormously powerful, because it takes out almost all the things that might be, leaving that might hypothetically have been, leaving things that still pass all the tests we keep on inventing. The second is, when we look at arguments about what we ought to do, typically we say, oh, well, science can't do anything about that. That's true at the level of whether something in high theory should matter. But actually, almost all of us believe that we should treat other people nicely. We have some differences about what nicely might mean, and how one value might be reconciled with another when they conflict, because often they conflict. But when you get to that point, then science has a contribution, because science can take the various things and see what are the consequences. What science does is it excludes what cannot be right, leaving us with some choices about what is right, and I'll finish there.
And do you agree?
No, I disagree with you about, I think we do know something about the things that exist. I think we do know, that there are genes, that there are fermions and bosons, that there are, and it is always, as I said, it is this wonderful methodology that we somehow or other devised. We were on the wrong track for a long time, Aristotelian physics, right? And let me just say, for my man Plato, that the big hint there comes in the Timaeus, where Plato says that he's given up with the forms already, I believe. Falsifiability in philosophy as well. And he'd given up on that. It's mathematics that he proposes there. I mean, there's a lot of hogwash in that Timaeus, but fortunately, certain people of the 17th century, certain people of genius, read it with great charity and imagination, one of them being Galileo, who always refers to Plato as the divine Plato. And what was he reading? He was reading the Timaeus. It was the only dialogue that was read in the later Middle Ages because Aristotelianism, you know, hegemony of Western Europe. And so, you know, when Galileo says, you know, the book of nature, the book is written in the language of mathematics, its symbols are triangles, circles, and other geometrical figures, all right, it's, you know, a little primitive there. You know, without this, one cannot read a word of the book and wanders around as in a dark labyrinth. That's kind of verbatim, a little messed up. But he's echoing certain passages in the Timaeus, this view that it's mathematics that is going to give us the key to the intelligibility of nature. And I would say we've gotten very far with that. And yes, it's always just an approximation to the truth. And so it works under certain limited conditions, you know, Newtonian physics, so it works under certain limited, right? If it's not too small and not going too fast, right? Space, not space, not time, space, time, the four-dimensional manifold spread out there. I believe it exists, you know, until we come up with a better theory. I believe in the description that quantum mechanics gives us. I'm waiting for you physicists to reconcile relativity and quantum mechanics. Something beautiful will come of that. But I think we are encroaching closer and closer on what is. Yeah, I would argue that. But it takes, I'm arguing for, you know, scientific realism, and that is a philosophical position, and you could very well agree with me, and we could work together in physics and have complete disagreements on what it is that we're doing and be able to collaborate perfectly, because we would disagree philosophically. But you had another question, too. I forgot it.
I was arguing that science helps us to deal with
It does. And that's why, you know, taking that Wilfrid Sellars model of reconciling everything, you know, that science is telling us, seeing which of our intuitions we have to revise, have to give up, maybe free will. I think people have been too hasty with that. Depends what you mean by freedom. But you know, maybe personal agency, maybe the self, because it's not down there on the neuronal level, right? The neurons, there are, 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses, and the brain has no idea what's going on in those 100 trillion synapses. Does that mean there's no self, you know, at all? Is that something we have to give up? Philosophical question. How do we interpret these results? Especially if we take them realistically, which I guess you don't, so you wouldn't worry, right? So you don't think we are composed of neurons, but I do. I do, and so I wonder about how to reconcile that with other things without which it seems I can't make sense of living my life, which I can distinguish from your life.
Hello, I'm Brendan Larvor, and I want to take issue with your history.
Okay.
Because I want to suggest to you that the more recent history is a bit dodgy as well. The idea that all of the ethical orders that we live by start in that suspiciously broad historical band, actually. If you allow yourself 600 years and then say, and everything important happened at that moment.
Yeah.
600-year-long moment is a bit.
Yeah.
But there are things, for example, the life of science, right? The idea that you could commit yourself to a life of science. You could not do that.
Yeah.
Until science had really emerged.
Right.
There is that odd bit at the end of the Nicomachean Ethics where he says the highest life is the life of contemplation of things that don't change, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But really, it's not possible for an ancient Greek to commit themselves to the life of the scientist. That's not an existential option
Of course,
for ancient
yeah.
Greek.
Yeah.
Authenticity. That's an idea that you don't find.
Right.
Either in Athens or in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's absolutely, for better or worse,
Yeah.
it's absolutely rampant in our culture, the idea that you should live by your own true inner self, whatever that turns out to
Yeah.
be, and we'll just hope that it's something nice. And you never see there's never a kind of discovery film where somebody says, I learned something today. I'm a moral coward.
Right. Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All that authenticity stuff that
Right.
permeates our culture, that's
Right.
new.
Sure.
And that's a really
Yeah.
important ethical idea.
Yeah.
And there are other examples. So
Yeah.
when you start to pile up some of these thoughts, the idea, the claim that you started with, that everything really ethically important was laid down in that axial period, and we've just been shuffling the marbles since then, doesn't really stack up, does it?
No, don't believe it at all. I don't believe it at all. That's why I would say that, but there was one approach to this question, to these questions of how to live a life worth living, that was forged there. Obviously didn't have all of the concepts that were going to emerge. They didn't have the concept of individual rights. This is not an idea that is in, what's more fundamental to our ethical view than individual rights? I wasn't saying that all of the concepts were there. Quite the contrary. What I was saying was an approach was there that we could reason this out on without bringing the gods into it, that we could reason it out on human terms, and because of that one approach, new concepts have emerged, right? The concept of individual right is just not there in the Greeks. It doesn't really emerge until the Enlightenment. And I hate to say it, but I think that religion had a lot to do with it, right? That in fact, the idea of, that all equal in the eyes of God, I used to think that, the Greeks did, they basically had it all, and it was a matter of, or they didn't have it all, but they had a lot of the basic ethical concepts. The thread was broken because of religion. Then they took up the thread again, Spinoza takes it up again and runs with it, right, goes on with it. But new concepts obviously do emerge. Now I think of it very, very differently, because something as fundamental as the notion of individual rights is completely lacking on the Greeks. But there is that approach of let's try to reason things out. We're not going to we're going to keep this on purely human terms. And that predates the appearance of the philosophers on the stage. It's actually there in the Homeric system, but it's not particularly ethical. What they want, and it's totally unethical, right? What they want is kleos. What they want is acclaim. What they want is to be sung by the poets, that this is a way of mattering, right? And so any kind of extraordinary, I call it the ethos of the extraordinary. Any kind of extraordinary will do, to be, beautiful like Helen, so, she causes a lot of tragedy and havoc, but nobody's going to forget her, right? Homer sings of her. Or to be a great athlete or a great warrior or a great rhetorician, or anything. But and that's basically the philosopher. Socrates is challenging that. He's saying there's only one kind of extraordinary that matters. The unexamined life is not worth living. I think that's wrong. I think that's too elitist, right? Not everybody has the conditions so that they can. It's a privilege to live an examined life. You need a little bit of talent and a lot of privilege. And so, we tend to regard with great piety that unexamined life is not worth living. I think that's wrong. I think we've come a long way from those Greeks, and we've evolved all sorts of concepts. Some have validity, some don't. But it's that approach that I would say begins there, and that is the one that allows for progress, that allows for these new concepts to come into play. Oh, I know what I wanted to say to the question before. You say that we all know that we should treat people nicely. Yeah, and that we just kind of disagree sometimes. We also fundamentally have disagreed on what people are. That has taken an awful lot of work. There were slaves for a very long time. They did not have to be treated nicely. Of course, the good Old Testament, their slavery, don't enslave the Israelite, and Plato, don't enslave the Greek. But it's taken a lot of argument for us to realize how abominable slavery is, chattel slavery. Women, how nicely do they have to be treated? Do they matter quite as much as men? That took a bit of argument too. Children, the colonized, the impoverished, the 99%, gays, future generations, kind of screwing it up for them. I'm not so sure that we all agree, and that it takes no argument, no philosophical argument, that all people have to be treated nicely. You guys are bringing out the fighter in me.
You said you initially studied physics and then you went to grad school in philosophy.
Yes.
So I wanted to find out, how did work in, say, philosophy assuage your sort of quibbles with quantum physics, if it did at all?
Well, there were people discussing that, and I eventually became very enamored of Bohm's view, of David Bohm's view. It seemed to me to be the most coherent, to do the least violation to intuitions. And I don't know how he is regarded on this side of the Atlantic, but he's slowly, there are people who are taking him quite seriously in the U.S. But it's still, I said to you, I was at the Santa Fe Institute for a semester, and I said to Murray Gell-Mann, we were talking about physics and quantum mechanics, and I said I was partial to Bohmian point of view, and he was, that was it. I didn't matter anymore, that. So I know there's, it's an interesting thing. Philosophy brings out the passions in people, because it really is a view of these views about, where are we? What kind of universe is this? How much knowledge do we have? How do we gain knowledge? So foundations of quantum mechanics, you really, really very aggressive fighting there. But I like Bohm.
Hi. On a slightly different note, I'm a teacher, very interested in philosophy for children and values-based education. I'm just wondering what your views are on developing philosophy in very young children.
Children are natural philosophers. I kept notes. I still have two daughters there, but they're, I sort of kept notes of the amazing things that would come out of them, metaphysical statements of various sorts. For example, once I have a daughter who's kind of a klutz, I was sitting at the table with her, and you can never go through a meal without her. And like her mother, she talks with her hands, right? So you never go through a meal without her knocking over something. And, it was grape juice on the good tablecloth. And she goes, "Look at what my body did." And I said, "You didn't do that?" "No, I didn't do that. My body did that," meaning she didn't intend it, but I was, kind of Cartesian dualism lurking in there. Lots of things, that I had another daughter who used to always say, when I would call her Danielle, and she was a little thing, 2 years old, she'd go, "I'm not Danielle, I'm this. And I do believe that she was trying to articulate that she was not an object in the world, but the subject of her world, right? And that she would say with great passion, I'm not Danielle. I'm not something you can name in the world, right? They both majored in philosophy. Yeah, but I think it's so very important because things are so in flux, then, and so many questions are so all sorts of wonderful metaphysical possibilities are floating around. But the most important thing that one could teach children, and I think the earlier you start, the better, is to articulate, to defend their reasons for believing the things they do and for acting the way that they do. And I think that should start very, very, to be little rational creatures and to have to account for their beliefs as well. I used to, tell my kids, you can be as rude as you want, insult me as much as you want, in what you say, if you can defend it, right? If you can account for it. Anyway, I believe that it should start very, very, very early, and I'm interested in ways of doing that.
My question was very much along those lines, actually. But I wonder if you have anything more to say about extending the reach of philosophy from those of us in this room who probably nearly exclusively university educated to everyone else.
Yeah, and I think that this is a time when it would be good to we're all committed to reason, to develop full resources of reason. Drives me mad when people still can say that without God, there's no anchor for morality, for treating each other with respect and with utmost dignity. I mean, quite the contrary. The real progress started with the Enlightenment, and we've kind of dragged religion along. So it's why people do not read the Bible literally anymore. No, of course you're not going to stone the Sabbath and violators, and it's all metaphorical. So how did that happen? It happened through reason. And when I say philosophical, I don't mean it needs to be professional philosophers. Many of these arguments were made by other people. I just mean accounting through reason. So how do we do this? Well, I don't think it helps, I'm going to say it, for some of our most prominent scientists to be attacking philosophy. I don't think that helps. I don't think it helps. But we're facing some, there is a kind of view that you can arrive at. There's a kind of, Spinoza called it, viewing the world sub specia eternitatis, under the guise of eternity. A very wide perspective, removing your own self as much as possible and thinking in a very global way, which I think we need tremendously, at this moment, and not just for everybody presently on the globe, but, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but also for the future generations. I mean, we have a way of discounting them, but they matter. If we matter, they matter too. They're going to be as committed to their lives as we are to ours, and we have to start acting in a way, and I think that takes some persuasion of the philosophical kind. I don't think that philosophy alone can do it. That's why I think, art is very, very important, and because the emotions are involved as well. And Uncle Tom's Cabin probably did more for the abolitionist movement in America than all of the arguments of the philosophers, right? To get people to identify and realize the full humanity of people who were being enslaved. So I do think, the emotions have to be brought into it through art and through literature. But, we have some very big problems facing us.
Please join me in showing our appreciation.